Oh wait, yeah, audio hijack.
Hi, we're
Hi.
live. That's happening.
And now I'm recording.
Oh, that's
Oh
good.
wait,
All right. Hi,
why is it?
everybody.
Oh
It's
no.
us. Look, forgot you saw. Watch. We're going to come back. It's going to be great. Oh, hi, everybody. We're
Good to
here.
see you there.
Uh, it is me, Jason, and him, Dan, and we are here. It's the most wonderful time of the fiscal quarter.
Quarter. It's weird that didn't become a carol. It just feels like
with
missed opportunity.
with the what would be in that? It's
It's
the
the
most
most one
wonderful time of the
with the
quarter.
colors being added and headwinds and are. Oh God, I'm not good at this on the
No,
spot.
it's with rising with good profit margins and no, nothing is going to rhyme with profit
Nothing rhymes with
margins.
margins. Yeah.
And I just wanted to get to
Analysts barge in.
to ask about puts and takes. Puts and takes is my favorite. All right. Big third financial quarter for Apple. Their best third financial quarter. Although I threw a little shade in my little quick post on it and said it's the most boring of the quarters, but it's still a good one for Apple. 85.8 billion. I think what I said to Dan earlier was that this was the most boring quarter in which you make $21.5 billion in profit.
Boy, what a
Ever.
problem to have, Jason. I would like to be in
Dull,
that boat. I
dull.
yeah, it's. I mean, we'll get into the numbers in a second, but like I was looking over the data sheet that Apple puts out when the press release gets announced, and what I thought was fascinating about it was how small the changes were in a lot of cases. Like a lot of stuff that's like, this is fine, kind of flat, a little bit up, a little bit down. There are really only two spots, which we'll get into, that I thought were kind of interesting, but you know,
Oh, then it'll be a quick live stream.
it may be a quick live stream.
That's fine. That's nothing wrong with that. Shall we go to the charts?
Let's go to the charts.
Oh, it's chart time, everybody.
Chart
Dan,
time.
you can see the charts, right?
I can see the charts.
Ah, it's good. This is good. We're really making this a high quality live
We're
stream.
professionals
All right.
now.
Total Apple revenue, 85.8 billion. As you can see, that is a record because if you go back to all the other Q3s, you can see that the best that they could muster before this was 83 in 2022, and that means it's a record.
Float away.
It is a record. I don't know. Maybe Q4 is even more boring than Q3. I don't know.
Because
It's all about the
Q1
holiday
is
quarter.
all of it's all people care about.
It's all about
the only
the
thing
holiday
people
quarter.
care about is Q1.
It is. It is. So you can see that they have on a kind of a rolling average basis. I would say that Apple has been pretty flat since 22. Pretty flat. Up
Not
here,
a lot of
down
movement
there, pretty flat in total revenue. So, which is, it's a lot of total revenue and a lot of profit. Speaking of which, total profit, 21.4 billion in profit. Is that
Fine.
a Q3 record? No, because in Q3 of 21 they made 21.7
0.7
profit. So close, but
those were the days.
Yeah, that was the salad days. So yeah, they're rolling in dough and rolling it right back to investors by doing stock buybacks and dividends because that's how they're using their cash flow. They want to keep their stockholders happy. Also, another number that's just very impressive when you look at it is gross margin. 46.3%.
Man.
Yeah, services, very, very high
Yeah.
margins. You can see that rise corresponds with the services going up.
And it does go to this idea, I think, that we've talked about, elsewhere, the idea of like Apple is very committed to having all of its products be profitable, right? It doesn't do loss leaders. It doesn't do, hey, let's sell this cheaper margin so that we can bring in more, stuff on other people buy other products or other products are higher margin. Like everything makes profit for them, everything. And that is at some points a problem, but not that big a problem apparently.
There was a really nice line from Luca Maestri talking about margins, and I'm in the analyst call today, and I don't know if I can find it, but what they were talking about costs, and he said that they were dealing with some with memory. Oh, here it is. He says, on the commodity side, I think what you're referring to, yeah, we've seen some increases on the memory front. But the rest of the commodities, we see a continuous decline. So in general, we feel we're well positioned. And as you know well, these are very high levels of gross margin for us, and we're pleased where we are. So, so memory is holding its cost, and that's an issue for them. And that's probably why Apple will be miserly with their RAM in their models where they can be and charge a lot for expansion because there's some cost there. But everything else, continuous decline. This is how they can sell an M1 MacBook Air for $650 or whatever it is. And an M2 Air I saw somebody was selling an M2 Air for like $800 somewhere. That's how they get those prices down, right? Is it's not actually eating the margins. It's that the product, again, some people know this, some people don't know this, but a product is never more expensive to make, generally, unless there's some very weird thing with the parts, than on the first day that it's made. They've made their huge investment in the infrastructure, and also the parts are basically the most expensive they'll be, and then they get cheaper. And that's why the Apple sells older models for cheaper, is because they can maintain their margins while selling it for cheap.
Economies of scale too, right? Like, I mean, they make millions and millions and millions.
Right.
Of these
so
things.
they roll in and say, well, we want it for this price, but we'll buy, 10 million of them.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, okay,
everything you can sell us. Yeah.
Here's the money we're going to use. Why don't you build another factory to make more of them for us? And it's like, yes, sir. Okay, yes, sir. I'll do that. That happens a lot, more than you'd think with this stuff. Here's a total revenue change, because the only constant is change. Good to see. So we got the big bump in 21. That's your COVID Mac, especially an iPad bump. Huge boost there. And then since then, it's been like the other, like the little black line in the other chart said, kicking around. Just kicking around.
Down recently. I mean, I think as we can see here, a lot of their recent quarters were, down because they had tough compares. But we're starting to roll into points too, where they're like, they get the better compares now because they were down, so now they get to go up.
You do that voice, and I'm trying to imagine what the conference call sounds like for Wayne Industries, right? Batman is there. Actually, there's Batman and Bruce Wayne on that call, and, and they're like, this question's for Batman.
Everyone's like, why is Batman on this call?
Are you the Knight? I am the Knight and the Dark Knight. Okay, this question's for Bruce Wayne. I want to know more about puts and takes.
The puts and takes were good. I put and take criminals every night. No one asked you, Batman. Please.
This question is more of a follow-up for Bruce Wayne, not for Batman. So didn't know that's where that was going, but I'm not surprised given that it's us. iPhone revenue. So iPhone flat. It's flat. They said, I think the last couple, that in constant currency, the iPhone continues to grow slightly, but it is not growing faster than exchange rates are eating away at the growth. So
there was a thing where they said numerous times about the 15 outselling the 14, I think, just comparatively.
Yes. They made reference to a thing that, I thought that was kind of interesting, right? The idea that at Apple, you get the sense that there's kind of like a big board up there that shows you like week 1 sales through like week 20 or week 30 for the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 15. And they say that if you line them up like that, that the iPhone 15 is outpacing the 14. It's doing better than the 14 model did.
That's interesting stuff. Yeah.
Right?
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, again, when you start hitting the level of the size that Apple is and you're dealing with macroeconomic issues, it's a hard thing to get past.
The truth is, undeniable is that it's not growing fast enough to override things like foreign exchange.
Sure, yeah.
That it doesn't have that level of growth. Now, I would say that the history of iPhone sales is they are stagnant for a while, for a few years, and then they take a quantum leap. It would not surprise me if that happens again, and that potentially you could see. So all of the analyst questions were about AI.
Yep.
unsurprisingly. But I do think, and Apple wouldn't cop to it. I mean, they sort of, Tim Cook was like, yeah, we think that's an opportunity. But what they weren't willing to say, that I think the analysts think, and that I think too, is there's potentially a buying cycle going on here. If Apple can do AI features right, and only the high end phones from last year can do AI,
Right.
it's going to sell a lot of new iPhones.
Drive a lot of upgrades. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And then
Because
you
there's
get another
literally only
cycle.
2 models, right? Like, yeah. It's always interesting. Maybe we need a graph in the future, or the chart, where we zoom this one out, right, to look at those macro cycles, because we know,
Super cycle,
yeah, exactly. Going way back to like the iPhone 6 or whatever, we know that is a thing that exists. iPhone 6, the iPhone 10, like these things were really big drivers because they were substantial changes. There was pent up demand, whether it's the iPhone 6 with a larger phone, or the iPhone 10, where they kind of like, we redesigned the whole thing. It's the iPhone of the future. That's the kind of stuff that drives it. So I think it will be interesting to see if people like line those things up too, especially because, and this is a thing that came up in a bunch of questions as well, Apple Intelligence is sort of a slow roll, right?
Yeah.
It's not all coming out at once. We already know that some of it's probably not coming out to 18.1 whenever that drops. So are they going to be walking out there day one with the iPhone 16 and saying, here, this is the phone for Apple Intelligence, and here's what the features, well, most of them you'll have soon,
and
but
the rest are
some
coming
of them
soon.
come next year. Yeah. So I'm a little
Right.
I'm a little more bearish on this selling big on AI, just because it's not all there yet, and I think it's a harder message for them to sort of put out there. But
yeah, but
I think that is coming.
It's true, but it you can kick that super cycle into gear and give it time, and even give it a year. But you're giving you're motivating people to upgrade, right? Which is the challenge whenever we're now, what is it's not even 2 years, like it's 3 years or 4 years for it. So to give them any motivator to switch is a good thing, but you're right, they need to have a provable like reason why. And just fuzzy AI may make tech industry people and analysts excited, but consumers want to like
consumers?
have a real thing that they get out of it, a real benefit. I went and grabbed, this is my that's my annual, just to show you. And this is the thing that I think Apple doesn't give enough credit for when people freak out about iPhone sales being flat, is that the other way for you to view it is that if you get a big peak, that it's a peak and then you drop back off again. And that's not what Apple tends to do. They tend to, whenever they go and get a boost, it stays at that level, which is flat, but it's flat at that new level. And so anyway, you can see here in the chart from 2009 to 2023 fiscal, that there was a huge jump in 14 to 15,
which is the iPhone 6.
An extra 50%, which is amazing. But if you look, they kind of held on to it. It went down a little bit, and then it shot up again in 18 to 165 billion, and then again a couple of years of slack.
In the iPhone 10,
and then it shot up in 21, and even a little further in 22 before going back. And so when we judge Apple's recent iPhone revenue, what we need to remind ourselves is, when you're zoomed in to like the last 4 years, you're missing the fact that they're kind of like on the mountaintop. They haven't just been kicking around here for the last 10 years. This is a peak that they've reached gradually over time with these bumps. So we'll see where they go from here, but that's what's going on. But yeah, I definitely think there are a lot of people in the analyst and investor community, and people, and which is not us. We write about Apple. We don't invest in Apple. We don't do that. But I think a lot of them are kind of like really excited about AI being the thing. And honestly, I mean, super cycles can be driven by design. I think they've often been driven by design. I do think Apple has a huge opportunity here because it's not artificial. There is a reason why they need to put this stuff in new hardware, and that gives them right. It's almost like they can be relieved. It's like, oh, thank goodness somebody invented something that people might actually want, that requires more hefty hardware that will force an upgrade cycle. Because it sort of felt like, I mean, the M1 MacBook Air is still perfectly great, and it came out in the year 2020, right? So this is an opportunity for them to sell new phones. That's what I'm saying. We'll see.
See.
let's go to the Mac.
The Mac. The Mac is
Mac's doing fine.
it's doing fine.
It's
doing
off of
fine.
its off
It's
of
up a
its
little bit.
record. I should say this is a good opportunity to talk about Apple likes to talk about the total installed base,
Mm-hmm.
which is devices in use. And the point they make is that they're growing their install base all the time. So more devices are being sold and put in use than are being retired. Now,
Which makes sense.
it's they've got ways to know some of that, although it is always hard to judge something like an installed base. But this is a good example where the Mac's got its biggest installed base ever. There are more Macs actively being used today than ever. But if you look at sales, and this goes back to what I was saying about the M1 Air, is they're not at the heights that they were in 21 and 22 because probably Apple Silicon and the pandemic led to a whole wave of purchases, and those computers are fine. So they're still selling Macs. They're still selling whatever that is, $28 billion a year in Macs. Like, not a bad business, but it's flat. That's all. And if you're an investor and obsessed with growth, it's only growing a little bit, but it's growing a little bit. It's okay.
Yeah. No, I think the Mac is a stable business, right? It's a mature business at this point. It's changed a lot in the last couple of years, but like you said, everything that they sell is very capable. Everything, the refresh cycles on those have always been longer than phones. People don't tend to swap them out every couple of years, even, and it's hard to justify. I mean, like you just said, I have a M1 MacBook Air, and yeah, the new ones look great. And I keep thinking, when the M4 comes, that'll be a big jump, and maybe I'll upgrade then. But then, will it be? I don't know. I don't know.
So there's the revenue change again. It's just 3 quarters of kind of flattish, but it is a tough compare. They had their pinnacle, and now they're just kind of doing it. Hey, here's something that I learned that I think you might find interesting, which is if you actually release a product, people will give you money for it. And I speak, of course, of the iPad, which had a $7.2 billion quarter because there were new iPads. There was iPad Air and iPad Pro. And as a result, I mean, it's not like Apple hasn't been selling iPads. Just, it's been, until the new ones, it was a whole year where they didn't announce anything. They still sold $7 billion worth of iPads holiday quarter. And that was at the end of a year where they didn't introduce any new iPads. But in terms of boosting growth, releasing those iPad Pros gave them a nice, if you look here at the changes, 24% year over year revenue boost. That's awfully nice for a product that, as I look at it here, has been down year over year 9 of the last 11 quarters. So, yeah, again, because it was at such a high, I think, during the pandemic where people were doing lots of computing things at home and for work and school, and I think they sold a lot of iPads then, and the problem with that is then it's going to be a few years before anybody needs more iPads.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we've looked at this in the past. The iPad is probably the most up and down of any of Apple's product lines.
For sure.
Like, it seems to vary immensely depending on what they decide to do in any given year, which is sometimes nothing and sometimes minor, right? Like, I mean, we've all talked about iPad hardware kind of outpacing the software. And I think that's part of, I think, the ups and downs to it is they come out with this new hardware and it's really, really great and it's really powerful. But a lot of people look at their iPad, just like we were talking about the Mac a second ago, and go,
it's fine.
Yeah, but mine's fine. Mine works great.
My M1 iPad Pro is still fine.
Same.
And they're on to M4
I have no...
M4 is
I know
great.
That's weird. That's just weird to think about.
But
it's so much.
That's a lot of M's. Okay, so iPad, Mac. Oh, so let's go on. We've got some more. We got one more product category, which is wearable home accessories, where they talk about how tough the compare is. $8 billion coming from this category, which includes Watch and AirPods and Vision Pro, but really it's Watch and AirPods. And they said the challenge with this is just, it's so tough to compare it to. What they're basically saying is, look, a lot of people were motivated to buy an Apple Watch Ultra. They weren't motivated to buy an Apple Watch Ultra 2. because the Ultra was
Right.
a motivator, and they released the new SE the year before, and people were motivated to get the Apple Watch
And the
SE.
AirPods Pro.
And the AirPods were revved last year, and they haven't done anything with that. So what they're basically, is it an excuse? Yes. Is it true? Yes. Also that it's both of those things. Still, it has it used to. I'll switch over to the growth chart here just to say this is a category that grew by a lot for quite a while, and it seems to have reached a kind of a steady state again where it's not the growth category. They built, this is the story of a lot of Apple's business lines. They have built a lot of big businesses that grew a lot and now are kind of not growing so much. And if I were a growth-oriented, investor, I guess that would be my question: is where does the growth come from in terms of the product categories? As a business seeking profit, I mean, it's all of these categories are pretty great, but this is one that you could point to and say, here's a product business that's growing really fast, and that's stopped.
Nobody asked about this, and I am curious to know. I doubt it had any real impact, but this is also like the Apple Watch removing the blood oxygen functionality kind of feels like a weird little curveball. I don't know how much that's impacting people.
It's just in the U.S. market, but still,
it's just in the U.S. market, but it's a big market, and I find it it's a weird situation to be in. But yeah, I think the other thing that you look at here is kind of just, in the same sense of that tough compare, like the Apple Watch, I think, has struggled like the iPad in recent years, especially in that sort of flagship model, right? The non-Ultra model, where every year it's like, well, what's new in the Apple Watch?
Yeah,
and like
incrementally different.
but it's not really convincing. It's not driving updates, really. People aren't upgrading.
Yeah, I think I have a Series 9, and I've been very happy with it. And the thing about the Massimo dispute with the oxygen sensor is I did have that moment where I thought, if they come out with a new Apple Watch this fall and I'm interested in it, am I going to buy it?
It'll do less.
Honestly, I did have a moment where I thought, I'm going to be in the UK. Do I want to buy an unencumbered Apple, like an Ultra, while I'm there? And the answer was no. I don't think I want an Apple Watch Ultra. I'm actually really happy with my Series 9, but or Series 8, not 9, right? It's
I was gonna
8.
say I'm on a 7, I think.
I think I'm on an 8. But anyway, I didn't, I haven't updated, and I'm fine with it. And so that's the challenge. They do talk a lot about people being new to Apple Watch or iPad or Mac. And that's a way you get some growth.
That's a big chunk.
And increase your installed base without necessarily having this, they growth thing. I think there's room for growth in all of Apple's product categories. I think the challenge there is that they can't keep, they've had their inflationary growth period, and now it's going to be determined by an upgrade cycle, and that means they need to develop a compelling enough product to kick off the next upgrade cycle.
Yep.
Okay, now let's talk about something that's not a product. It's services. Services, another record. That's because services is almost always another record, because it largely goes up, certainly year over year, and even sequentially it mostly goes up, and it went up again, so $24.2 billion. This is real. Now we're talking real money. It is no wonder Apple talks now about their unique position as a synthesis of hardware, software, and services, right? Like this is, sometimes I think this is going to be Tim Cook's ultimate legacy, even though he has presided over this enormous period of growth for Apple, is adding services as part of what Apple does. And you can see it and the services are, right? This includes Google search revenue. It includes the App Store. It also does include their bundle, and it includes everything. It includes Apple Care. Like all of that is in here. But the fact is, wherever this is coming from, it continues to grow, and they have more, active Apple IDs in their, with subscriptions to things than ever before, and it continues to grow. And Apple owning one of the analysts on CNBC that I was watching before the results came out said something like you buy the Apple products and then they want to bill you for something every month and you just do it because they say you should. And I thought, well, that's a gross simplification, but not wrong.
Not wrong. Yeah, I had that moment where I kept expecting somebody in the analyst call to ask about that story this week where they're talking about Apple trying to curtail costs on the TV Plus stuff. Because that felt like kind of a ripe moment for that. Apple talked up certainly. I always enjoy when they talk up their TV shows, especially how Tim Cook liked to brag about the number of nominations.
Emmy awards, yeah.
Emmy awards, yeah.
Nominations.
A lot of Emmy nominations.
Mm-hmm.
And returning favorites.
Severance got a shout out.
I know. Severance, Slow Horses.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess as long as it's printing money, people can't see inside like what, well, yes, it costs a lot, but it's still aggregate making a lot of money. I'm sure Apple has concerns about it. As we said, they operate everything as much as possible as a P&L so that they can it's making money. But
I'm not sure.
I think they like the prestige aspect of it. I think that's a big component.
Yeah. This is, I mean, it's a tangent, but since you brought it up, I get the sense, and this is just a outsider looking inside the black box, but I get the sense. I'll put it this way: I have a hard time believing that Eddie Q goes to Zach and Jamie, who run TV Plus,
gotta get your costs down,
and say, boys, I gave you a budget and you blew through it. So next time, stick to the budget. I don't think that's what's happening.
Chomping on his cigar. Yeah.
I think it's more like Eddie is talking to them and saying, you don't have unlimited money to spend. We're happy with what you're doing, but you've had some overages. Try to, we're in a period now where, be a little more aggressive about canceling things that aren't working for you and watch some of the overages. I think they also feel like they're getting taken advantage of, which is sort of one of the stories that you read in the Hollywood press, that when Apple comes calling, everybody's prices go up because they think Apple's got all the money, which they do. But there's that story about how much Severance episodes were costing, and that included like production overruns, and Foundation had big cost overruns.
Yep.
And it wasn't even like, I don't want to spend money on this TV show. It was more like, what's with all the cost overruns? This is not a charity, right? So I think there was more like, please exert some financial discipline more than it was. But again, it's just like when people were complaining about like that it was going to be expensive NBC, right? It's consider the source. My guess is it's people who were impacted in some way by that. They came in here and told us not to spend money on reshoots. It's like, yeah, they did. They're the money men.
I find it interesting compared to just to throw out another example that's sort of in the news, the Apple Arcade story that you linked to earlier today, talking about Apple spending money, and they definitely did spend money. A lot of people in that story were like, the advances were great, but that the follow through hasn't been there. And right. I'm kind of curious. In some ways, you kind of want them to run Apple Arcade more like Apple TV Plus.
Yeah.
I think that's the goal, but I don't think Apple has come to that conclusion yet.
I think the difference is that they went to Sony and hired Zach and Jamie because
they need the commensurate.
They knew they didn't know that business, and yet culturally Apple still thinks that they understand like games, which they don't. And because they think, oh, it's software and app store and we can just handle it. And I think that they would have been better off either buying like a game studio or hiring an executive like they hired Zach and Jamie, hire an executive or executive team who really gets games to do Apple Arcade. And instead they're like, no, we'll do it in-house in a black box that nobody ever has heard of, and we'll use our usual strategy. And yeah, my feeling is that is why Apple Arcade is not what it could be, is that they're not treating it like TV Plus, and they should. TV Plus has been a success. Those guys know what they're doing and are doing, I would say, a good job. And if the goal is nominations and some praise and accruing to Apple's ecosystem, like if anybody, look, we talked about how much money they made. They can afford it.
Yeah, and all that aside, I think it's also, worth pointing out that what's driving much of this, as they said, I think is like, what is it? iCloud payment, like I think a lot of these, the records they're hitting, right? Like we think of Apple TV Plus as being the face of services because it is certainly one of the most visible aspects, but it's not what's making them money here.
No, so revenue records in the majority of services categories, all-time revenue records in advertising. Oh boy, cloud, and payment services. So Apple Pay.
Yeah, Apple Pay. Maybe I assume Apple Pay. That is certainly. I don't think it's the Apple Card.
I don't think so. No, I think it's Apple Pay. I don't think that's what's driving that. So all-time records. Those are the services though that hit the all-time records, and I think that's telling. And of course,
and it's the App Store and Google and all that.
The Google payment
big chunks
is a big part of it too.
Yep.
But still, it's all kind of a whole, and the whole ecosystem thing, and that's why there's truth in that. I just buy my phone, and then Apple tells me to pay something monthly, and I do. There is some truth to that in terms of like a broader ecosystem. And I do wonder if, as we go down the Apple Intelligence path, if we might actually see them do some bifurcation where you need to be an Apple One subscriber to get. I mean, we've talked about this before. It hasn't happened yet, other than private relay. And I don't love the idea of OS features essentially being paywalled, but I do think if they bear ongoing costs, it's a good enough excuse to do it. So what has ongoing costs? Cloud infrastructure has ongoing costs. So I could see them maybe charging for some features above and beyond using Apple Intelligence. And then the other one that I think that we've all kind of suspected might be something they bundle in, like you've got to be an iCloud Plus, Apple One bundle, whatever, is the satellite stuff, right? That would be a thing you could do. The messages over satellite and stuff like that. That isn't non-emergency stuff.
Non-emergency. Yeah.
So we'll see. There's more room for services stuff for sure for them.
Sure is.
And the number keeps going up. Here's the pie chart, which I just think since we're talking about services, I just want to point out. Services has gone from being one of the little pie wedges to being the number 2 pie wedge, way far away from all the other ones except the iPhone. How about that?
Yeah. Gonna be interesting to see. I mean, that mix, there is a point where the services starts to really compete with the iPhone even more. I mean, they're not that far apart now compared,
But
they're
just
closer
to be clear,
than anything else is.
Services is bigger than the Mac, the iPad, and the wearables category put together.
Right, and it's closer to the iPhone. There's less difference between iPhone and services than between services in the next highest category.
Right, or it's kind of about the same, right? Isn't
it's
it?
like 16, well, it was 16, 18, 20,
it's 18
pretty close.
Away from iPhone.
And 19 away from wearables.
Yeah.
Yeah, 19 away from wearables. So pretty close, yeah. So it's kind of in that comfortable middle ground. I'm impressed that wearables, honestly, is bigger than Mac and iPad today, but it's very close. It's very close. It's rounding errors.
They're all in the ballpark there. Here's the overtime, which shows seasonality and all that, but you can just see that the services chunk, just if you want to visualize that a little differently. I have a couple other little charts before we close out the Chartapalooza. Regional, people always want to know. They said 7% of App Store revenue comes from Europe, which is actually EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, because Apple's Europe category isn't just Europe. It is the Middle East and Africa as well. America is still Apple's biggest market by a lot, but then the Europe, Middle East, Africa, EMEA follows, and then China. And then you have to go way down further to get the rest of Asia Pacific and the Japan categories that are down lower. So that's how they cover the world. But America's, and all of them were up a little bit except for China, which was down.
China had some problems.
Here's your year-over-year growth where you can see it. The EMEA and America is up. China growth not as far down as it was the last couple of quarters, but still down. That's how you read that one. And then I've got a simple, because everybody's paying attention to China. Apple says they're doing better in China than it looks, because this is where the foreign exchange really hits them. But still,
it was still not good, even with the constant currency adjustment. It was still down.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's the charts.
That's the charts. Yeah. The only other thing that struck me, as you kind of mentioned too, was all a surprising amount of talk about Apple. Well, maybe not surprising. Apple Intelligence was kind of the thing everybody wanted to ask about, and people ask unreasonable questions like, "Oh, do you think it's been received well?" And Tim's like, "It came out on Monday. That's literally the amount of time. Do you think it will
Also-
drive all your future iPhone sales? It came out on Monday. I
It-
can't tell you anything
Also,
else."
it's a developer beta, and they're like, "Oh, well,
Yeah.
we can't wait to see what developers do with it." There are no tools for developers.
There's nothing for
It's
developers
all
to do
just
with it.
baked into Apple apps. Somebody was like, "Does this really open up things for your developers? What apps will that people use with this?" And he's like, "Well, there's Notes and Mail and Calendar." And I'm like, "Those are your apps, Tim." But this is the thing: is the only thing that's in this entire story for developers is Intents, right? It's the shortcut stuff that will allow Siri to control apps essentially by you provide them as an app developer with hooks, which is great. But like the thought occurs to me that what's missing in a lot of this Apple Intelligence stuff is, if I'm a developer, shouldn't I have access to that model, to that engine to do things in my app? And for this go around, I think the answer is that Apple's not going to give you that. And that's a problem, because you could really supercharge. I mean, you can bring your own model and train your own model, and there are things to do that, and that will still work. But what they're not being given is access to Apple's models. So unless you happen to be a text editor, and so you can use the thing that's embedded in the standard text controls that does, your style check and your simplification and your summarization and all those things. But if what you want is something, you want to take advantage of Apple's LLM to do something, the answer is no. Like there isn't a developer API for stuff like that. And so It is weird that it's in a developer beta at all, because I'm not quite sure what the developers will do with it. It's more that calling it developer beta is more like just saying forbidden fruit, be careful, watch out, it could be dangerous. But I don't know. So there's going to be, like, Apple's happy to let those guys think, those analysts think that it's developers are going to rush in there. But like year one, other than the Siri intent stuff, it's not really a developer story. It's a first party story.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it goes back to this idea of we don't really know what the consumer response to it's going to be. It's certainly, AI obviously is having a big moment and a lot of visibility, but we aren't really sure what that means for people actually buying Apple products. Like, most people you talk to right now about it are like, vaguely might have heard of it, but a lot of them don't.
So I am not your ideal general consumer judging tech products, right? I'm not. I'm as far away from that as you can get. But I will say, I've been watching a lot of the Olympics. And because it's live sports, there's ads. And a lot of those ads are AI ads. There are especially a lot of Google AI ads.
I saw the Google ones, yeah.
I don't know what they're thinking. Like, and this is, I think, the problem with AI is these ads are like, whoa, AI, shiny. And as a human being, I look at that ad and I think, no. Like, no. Like, there's the one where it's like, oh, I want to write a fan letter. I'll have Google write a fan letter to as a kid, writing a fan letter to an athlete I admire, and they got really hammered for that, and I think they pulled that ad. I think it's not even in the rotation anymore. But there are many other Google AI ads that a lot of them are like animations. It's like, what can it do? And it's like, yeah, but what can it do? And they don't know. And so I think Apple is uniquely positioned to do a better job of explaining like why you would actually do it. But like, yeah, AI is not a means to an end. AI is a thing that enables things people want. And right now,
it's a little bit like the Super Bowl where there were all the crypto ads, right? Like, it's kind of like, how many people are you actually appealing to? Is this something that the average person wants to buy? I don't know. I don't think so, but we'll see.
I don't know. It's going to be, yes, it will be interesting to see how Apple markets it in the fall, because there's a question of like, what's in the new iPhone, and is there stuff in the new iPhone, or is their big pitch going to be the new iPhone is most important because it runs Apple Intelligence? And are they selling people an empty box because those features aren't going to be there at launch, and they're going to slowly roll out over the course of a year and really years? Or are there other features in there to motivate people and then how does Apple motivate them? Because Apple Intelligence is a fun idea, but they need to actually say, no. Here's how it will benefit you. And that means like really good Siri demos that, the developer beta cannot provide. So there's more work to be done there. They did say today, they mentioned again their philosophy with things like ChatGPT and others is world knowledge, which the way they put it is Apple wants to be the model for everything that knows about you. But if you just want to know about like something out in the world, they'll kick it out to GPT or whatever.
Partners. I actually think this was one of the most interesting points. I kind of fascinating from a pure business perspective in this one, which is where Tim talked late on about this in terms of how they do this hybrid model because of their work with ChatGPT, and essentially talking about, well, yeah, I mean, you look at our balance sheet and like we're developing stuff, we're making capital expenditures based on things, but keep in mind we have partners, and so some of these things are their capital expenditures.
Right.
And it's like that's an interesting way of looking at it. Is like, well, we do our own development, but everybody else is also kind of doing development for us.
Well, this is, I mean, like they're using Google to train their models, Google's cloud,
right.
And like they pay Google, and Google does the hardware, right? Like Google has to build that infrastructure, but Apple doesn't. And Apple uses, I think they use Azure, and they may also use AWS to do a lot of iCloud, right? Like they have their own data centers, but they also have partners. And so when they were asking about CapEx, right? They're asking about, are you going to have to build a bunch of data centers? And they're like, well, yeah, but no. Like we'll have to build some for
private cloud compute. Yeah.
But other stuff will just, you go to a partner and say, hey, Amazon, we want to spin up whatever and put that in our cloud, and they can do that too. So it was an interesting perspective, right? Which is like, it's more complicated than just, we don't just build it all ourselves. And I'm sure, right, it's Apple's philosophy that people call it the Cook doctrine, the idea of controlling stuff that is core to your product. Cloud, in like private cloud compute is a good example of something that's core that they don't want it out of their hands. But generally available cloud resources they're so generally available that Apple doesn't need to replicate them. That's
right.
Like there are plenty of sources of cloud infrastructure out there for them to buy into. And so they can use that and let Amazon pay the bill.
Sure thing. Why not?
Okay. Well, that I think is going to wrap up our quick 42 plus minute take on charts and Apple results. For now, we'll be back in 3 months, right? Of course. If you are watching this and you want to read more about Apple stuff and you don't know, sixcolors.com is where we write on a regular basis about this stuff. And it would be swell if you became a member if you're not already. We do a podcast every week, and there's a great Discord community, and there's a funny column by John Moltz every Friday that is for members only, and a bunch of other good stuff, newsletter, all sorts of fun stuff. So go to sixcolors.com and click on the membership link. And if you are a member, thank you. We love you. And,
thank you.
And that is it. So I'm going to wrap us up now. Say goodbye, Dan.
Bye, Jason.
Bye.
I have to think about that too much.